July 10, 1945. The war in Europe was over. Hitler was dead. The Third Reich had collapsed into rubble and ash. Millions had died. The most destructive conflict in human history had finally ended, or so the world believed. Because on this exact day, 62 days after Germany's unconditional surrender, something impossible happened in the cold waters off the coast of Argentina. A German U-boat surfaced, silently, without warning, without a distress signal, without any radio communication to anyone, just a submarine, rising from the deep, as if it had been waiting for exactly the right moment. The Argentine naval officers who responded to the sighting couldn't believe what they were seeing. This was July. The war had ended in May. Every German submarine was supposed to have surrendered weeks ago. Hundreds of U-boats had already surfaced across the Atlantic, raised black flags, and handed themselves over to Allied forces. But this one hadn't. This one had disappeared for 62 days, and now it was here, in Argentina, with a crew that looked like ghosts, hollow-faced, exhausted, silent, and a captain who, when finally questioned, gave answers so carefully constructed, so deliberately vague, that American intelligence officers immediately knew they were dealing with something far bigger than a simple case of delayed surrender. This was U-530, and what really happened during those 62 missing days is one of the most chilling, most deeply documented, and most deliberately buried mysteries of the entire Second World War. To understand why U-530's arrival shocked the intelligence world, you first need to understand what was happening in the final days of Nazi Germany. By early 1945, the senior leadership of the Third Reich knew the war was lost. Berlin was being bombed into ruins. Soviet forces were advancing from the east. American and British forces were pushing from the west. The collapse was not a matter of if, it was a matter of when. And in those final desperate weeks, certain very powerful, very dangerous men began making plans. Not plans to fight, not plans to surrender, plans to disappear. The SS had been quietly moving assets for months. Gold bullion, foreign currency. Stolen artwork worth hundreds of millions. Scientific research documents representing years of weapons development. And something else, something that has never been fully accounted for. Biological and chemical research files from programs, so horrific that their very existence was considered a liability. These assets needed to go somewhere the Allies couldn't reach them. Argentina was the answer. President Juan Perón had made no secret of his sympathies. His government had been quietly facilitating the movement of European fascists into South America since the early 1940s. False identities were arranged. Properties were prepared. An entire infrastructure for Nazi relocation had been constructed in plain sight, hidden behind the language of immigration policy and political neutrality. The escape routes were called ratlins, and the most secretive, most heavily loaded ratlins didn't use ships or planes. They used submarines. U-530 was a Type IX-C-40 U-boat, one of Germany's most capable long-range submarines, designed specifically for extended Atlantic operations. It could travel thousands of miles without resupply. It could stay submerged for extended periods. It was, in every technical sense, the perfect vessel for a covert transoceanic mission. Its captain was Otto Wermuth, 25 years old, young but experienced, hand-selected for his command. In April 1945, as Berlin burned and the Reich collapsed, U-530 left its base on the German coast and sailed into the Atlantic. It never came back. Germany surrendered on May 8. Admiral Dönitz, the commander of the entire U-boat fleet, issued an immediate and direct order to every German submarine still at sea. Surface, fly a black flag. Surrender to the nearest Allied vessel. The war is over. U-530 received that order and ignored it. For 62 days, this submarine simply vanished. Allied tracking stations scanned the Atlantic. Intelligence services monitored every known U-boat frequency. Ships and aircraft searched shipping lanes across thousands of square miles of ocean. Nothing. U-530 was gone until July 10th, when it surfaced in Argentina. And everything about its arrival raised immediate and deeply troubling questions. The Argentine authorities who boarded U-530 that morning were not prepared for what they found, or rather, what they didn't find. The submarine had been stripped. Every document of operational significance was gone. The ship's log, the most important record of any naval vessel's movements, had been destroyed. Navigational charts showing the route had been destroyed. Operational orders had been destroyed. Personal identification papers for most crew members had been destroyed. Someone had spent considerable time ensuring that U-530's journey could never be reconstructed. The cargo hold was empty. The torpedo tubes were empty. No weapons, no ammunition. Nothing that suggested this vessel had been on any kind of combat mission. And the crew, when medical officers examined them, showed signs of extreme physical exertion. Not the kind of exhaustion that comes from sailing a submarine across the Atlantic. Something more. Muscle fatigue consistent with heavy manual labor, loading and unloading, moving significant weight over an extended period. American intelligence officers were on the scene within hours. And what they found among the crew's personal belongings stopped them completely. Argentine pesos, fresh, recently issued. Argentine currency in the personal possession of German sailors before U-530 had officially entered Argentine waters. Someone had paid these men in South American money. Recently, Captain Wormuth had no explanation. The interrogation of Otto Wormuth lasted weeks. He was professional, calm, cooperative on surface details. But on the questions that mattered, the route, the stops, the cargo, the 62 missing days, he was a wall. His official story was simple. He had received the surrender order. He had feared Allied retribution. He believed his crew would be treated as war criminals. Sailing to neutral Argentina was, in his telling, simply the safest option for his men. Intelligence officers tore this story apart piece by piece. The timeline didn't work. The distance from German waters to Argentina is roughly 8,000 miles. At standard U-boat operational speeds, that journey takes approximately 30 to 35 days under normal conditions. U-530 had been at sea for 62 days. That is almost double the expected transit time. The submarine had not sailed directly to Argentina. It had gone somewhere else first, possibly multiple places. And whatever it had done during those extra 30 days, Wormuth refused to discuss. Then came the detail that changed the entire investigation. 3 weeks after U-530 surrendered in Argentina, a second U-boat arrived, U-977. Same situation. Surfaced off Argentina. Crew emaciated and evasive. Documents completely destroyed. Captain vague about the route. Timeline that didn't match a direct crossing. 2 submarines, same destination, same behavior. Same anomalies. The probability of coincidence was effectively zero. American intelligence concluded, in internal documents that would remain classified for decades, that both submarines had been part of a coordinated operation, a mission planned before the German surrender. A mission designed to move something or someone across the Atlantic before the Allies could intervene. What that something was has never been officially confirmed, but the evidence points in one direction. The organization known as Odessa had been operating for months before the war ended. The name comes from the German organization Der Emil-Legion, SS-Eng-E, Harrigan. In English, the organization of former SS members. For years after the war, some historians debated whether Odessa was a formal organization or simply a loose network. That debate is now settled. It's declassified documents from the CIA, MI6. And the OSS confirmed that Odessa existed, was structured, was funded, and was extraordinarily effective. Its primary purpose was extraction. Moving high-value Nazi personnel out of Europe before they could be captured and prosecuted. Scientists who had developed weapons technology the Allies desperately wanted. Senior SS officers responsible for war crimes on a massive scale. Intelligence operatives whose knowledge of Soviet infiltration networks made them valuable to Western intelligence services. These people were moved through Spain, through Vatican-connected intermediaries, through neutral countries, and ultimately to Argentina. But Odessa didn't only move people, it moved wealth. Historians have documented the movement of Nazi gold, foreign currency reserves, and looted assets worth billions in today's terms. Much of this wealth was never recovered. Much of it was moved through South American banking networks that were never fully investigated. And some of it, the most sensitive, most dangerous material, was moved by submarine. U-530 left Germany in April 1945 with an empty weapons bay and a full crew. It arrived in Argentina in July with an empty cargo hold and Argentine currency in its crew's pockets. Draw your own conclusions. For decades, the physical story of U-530 seemed to end with its surrender. The submarine was transferred to American custody, eventually scrapped. Its secrets apparently lost, but the ocean keeps its own records. In recent years, a research team working with declassified OSS documents, Argentine naval archives, and modern deep-water sonar technology began mapping the underwater terrain along the route U-530 would have traveled during its missing 30 days. What they found at a specific set of coordinates that matched references buried inside partially declassified American intelligence files changed everything. On the seabed, at a depth consistent with wartime diving and disposal operations, the sonar revealed a cluster of objects that were not natural formations, metal containers, partially buried under decades of accumulated sediment. But their arrangement was not random. They had not fallen from a sinking ship. They had not been scattered by current or time. They had been placed, deliberately, carefully, by people who knew exactly what they were doing and intended for these objects to remain undisturbed. The containers were sealed. The research team notified Argentine authorities immediately. The response was faster than anyone expected. Within days, the site was officially restricted. Access was denied. A government review was announced. That was over a year ago. No findings have been released. No explanation has been given for why a wartime disposal site in those particular waters would generate such an immediate and complete government response. The researchers have been told their work is under review. They have heard nothing since. Otto Ermuth lived until 1993. He never changed his story. In dozens of interviews across nearly 5 decades, he maintained that U-530's voyage to Argentina was nothing more than an act of survival. No secret mission, no hidden cargo, no conspiracy. He was consistent. He was calm. He was, by all accounts, a man who had made complete peace with his silence. But in 1987, a German journalist conducted what would become one of Wermuth's final major interviews. It was long, wide-ranging, covering his entire career, his memories of the war, his feelings about Germany's history. And near the middle of the interview, buried inside a long answer about the final days of the conflict, Wermuth said something that the journalist almost didn't catch. He said, and these are his exact words, that some things carried across the ocean were never meant to be found, and that it was better for everyone that they remain where they are. The journalist moved on to the next question. He never followed up. Nobody ever did. U-530 surrendered in Argentina on July 10, 1945, 62 days after the war ended. Its documents destroyed. Its cargo unidentified. Its route unconfirmed. Its captain silent until death. The sealed containers on the Argentine seabed remain sealed. The government review continues. And somewhere in the deep cold water off the South American coast, in the darkness where light never reaches and silence is absolute, whatever Otto Wermuth carried across the Atlantic during those 62 missing days is still down there, still waiting. If you watched this far, you already know the next story is darker. Hit subscribe, because what comes next has been classified even longer.